Dive into the fiery showdown that rocked the political and media landscape, where satire cuts sharper than any headline. Like, subscribe, and drop your boldest takes below to keep the heat rising at Karoline Now. The stage lights dimmed across America as Jim Kimmel stepped into the crosshairs of political warfare, his familiar grin masking the surgical precision of what would follow. This wasn't just another monologue. It was the opening salvo in a cultural battle that would leave no reputation unscathed. In the shadowed wings of power, Karoline Leavitt, Trump's rapid response director, watched with growing unease as Kimmel began his performance. She couldn't have known then how completely the late-night battlefield would shift beneath her feet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kimmel began, his voice carrying the deceptive lightness of a comedian who had found the perfect target. "Tonight we're going to talk about leadership, or whatever they're calling it these days in the White House." The audience erupted, their laughter cascading through living rooms across America. What unfolded wasn't merely comedy, it was evisceration dressed as entertainment, a masterclass in political dismantling disguised as late-night fare. Kimmel's relentless barrage targeted the most vulnerable aspects of Trump's administration: the revolving door of staff, the contradictory statements, the midnight tweets that undid weeks of careful political positioning. Each punchline landed with precision, exposing not just incompetence but the dangerous theater that had replaced governance. In war rooms across Washington, phones lit up as Leavitt and her team scrambled to contain the fallout. The comedy they had dismissed as irrelevant was suddenly cutting through their carefully constructed narrative with devastating efficiency. "They're so busy covering up yesterday's scandal," Kimmel continued, "they don't even have time to properly plan tomorrow's disaster." The audience's response transcended mere amusement. It was recognition, a collective exhale of truths too often buried beneath partisan noise. As Kimmel's performance reached its crescendo, the true power dynamic became clear. The jester had become the truth-teller, wielding satire like a scalpel against the armor of political spin. His words, sharper than any headline, carved through the protective layers of denial that had insulated Trump's inner circle for so long. Leavitt watched from a distance, her phone buzzing with demands for response, knowing that some performances cannot be countered with talking points. Some moments in political theater changed the rules of engagement entirely. The nation's attention remained fixed on Kimmel's stage, unable to look away from this slow-motion collision of comedy and power, a spectacle both riveting and excruciating in its naked truth. In the aftermath of Kimmel's devastating performance, Karoline Leavitt emerged from the digital shadows like a wounded predator. The Trump rapid response director had weathered countless media storms, but this felt different. The laughter still echoed, not just in studios and living rooms, but across the digital landscape, where political battles are truly won and lost. With trembling fingers and righteous fury, Leavitt launched her counteroffensive. Her first tweet appeared at 2:17 a.m., a time when judgment often falters and raw emotion rules. "The Hollywood elite showing their true colors again," she wrote, "attacking our president while real Americans suffer. It was only the beginning." What followed was a masterclass in panic disguised as strategy, a digital tantrum that revealed more about the fragility of Trump's inner circle than any comedy monologue could hope to expose. Leavitt's timeline transformed into a battlefield of conspiracy theories, deflections, and personal attacks against Kimmel's character, each post more frantic than the last. "They're terrified of our movement," she declared to her followers, who dutifully amplified her message across the echo chambers of partisan media. "That's why they mock what they can't understand." But seasoned political observers noted the desperation seeping through her carefully constructed outrage. Her words carried the unmistakable scent of fear, not of Kimmel himself, but of the truth his comedy had laid bare. By mid-morning, Leavitt had shifted strategies, attempting to reframe Kimmel's surgical takedown as an attack on everyday Americans. "When they laugh at our president," she wrote, "they're laughing at YOU." The irony wasn't lost on media analysts. In her frenzied attempt to control the narrative, Leavitt had only amplified Kimmel's original message, ensuring his comedy reached audiences who might never watch late-night television. Her posts grew increasingly disjointed as the day progressed. Accusations flew like shrapnel. Kimmel was part of a deep-state conspiracy. His writers were feeding information to political opponents. His laughter was a mask for sinister designs against American values. In the West Wing, sources described a tense atmosphere. Trump himself had reportedly watched clips of the monologue multiple times, his reaction swinging between dismissal and rage. The presidential Twitter account remained ominously silent, a vacuum quickly filled by speculation and insider gossip. Leavitt's defense strategy collapsed under its own weight by evening. What began as righteous indignation had devolved into a showcase of the very chaos Kimmel had mocked. Each defensive post inadvertently validated his portrayal of an administration in freefall. When satire provokes such desperate countermeasures, noted one political commentator, it suggests the target recognizes an uncomfortable truth in the comedy. As night fell across Washington, Leavitt's digital crusade continued unabated, but its impact had transformed. What she intended as a fierce defense had become, in the eyes of a watching nation, the most compelling evidence that Kimmel's satirical arrows had found their mark with devastating accuracy. The spotlight now turned to the ringmaster himself, Donald Trump. With Karoline Leavitt's digital defense crumbling under scrutiny, Kimmel shifted his satirical artillery toward the administration's grand spectacle of governance. From the studio's center stage, Kimmel dismantled Trump's carefully constructed image with surgical precision. "This isn't a presidency," he told his audience as laughter rippled through the theater. "It's a reality show where the plot keeps getting more absurd but nobody can change the channel." What followed was a masterclass in political evisceration, not through partisan rage, but through the acid bath of humor that strips away pretense and leaves only uncomfortable truth. Kimmel methodically exposed the yawning chasm between Trump's bombastic promises and his hollow achievements. The infamous border wall, once the cornerstone of campaign rallies, now stood as a fractured monument to failed ambition. "Remember when Mexico was going to pay for it?" Kimmel asked, letting the audience's knowing laughter provide the answer. Now American taxpayers are footing the bill for what amounts to an expensive fence with commitment issues. The tariff wars that had been trumpeted as easy victories were revealed as self-inflicted economic wounds. Kimmel flashed graphs showing American farmers drowning in unsold harvests, while manufacturing costs soared. Behind the joke lurked a damning truth. The administration had sacrificed working-class stability on the altar of ego. Perhaps most devastating was Kimmel's dissection of the pandemic response. Without raising his voice, he reconstructed a timeline of presidential statements alongside the mounting death toll. "I take no responsibility at all," Trump's own words echoed through the studio, followed by a silence heavier than any punchline. Behind the scenes, White House staffers watched with growing alarm. Sources close to the Oval Office described a president obsessed with these comedic takedowns, often spending more time discussing late-night ratings than national security briefings. The very attention Trump craved had become his greatest vulnerability, a spotlight that revealed not strength, but an emptiness at governance's core. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt faced an impossible task. Each morning brought new satirical wounds to cauterize, new jokes that resonated because they carried kernels of undeniable truth. Her defensive statements grew increasingly unmoored from reality, struggling against what political analysts were now calling the Kimmel effect, the phenomenon where satire reveals political truths more effectively than traditional journalism. "When humor draws blood," observed one media scholar, "it's because the comedian has found the precise point where absurdity meets reality." As viewership for Kimmel's segments skyrocketed, a remarkable transformation occurred in public discourse. Phrases from his monologues entered everyday conversation. Complex policy failures became accessible through the shared language of his analogies. Trump's governing philosophy, built on distraction, denial, and the constant cultivation of outrage, was being deconstructed night after night through nothing more lethal than well-crafted jokes. In response, Trump's inner circle attempted to dismiss Kimmel as just another Hollywood elite, disconnected from real America. Yet privately, they understood what polls confirmed. Laughter was penetrating defensive walls that facts alone could not breach. The administration found itself in an unwinnable war against the most devastating weapon in democratic discourse, ridicule backed by reality. And as Trump raged behind closed doors and Leavitt exhausted herself in futile counterattacks, Kimmel simply continued holding up the mirror, reflecting not just one man's leadership failures, but an entire political system surrendered to spectacle over substance. Behind the Twitter storms and press briefings, a more revealing drama unfolded. Karoline Leavitt, once heralded as Trump's digital guardian angel, was now exposed in the unforgiving light of scrutiny, not as the strategic genius her rapid ascension suggested, but as something far more telling about the administration she served. Cal Morgan observed from the shadows as Kimmel's satirical spotlight shifted, illuminating the machinery behind Trump's messaging apparatus. "What we're witnessing isn't revolutionary communication," Kimmel told his audience, voice steady with the confidence of a surgeon identifying a malignancy, "but the oldest trick in politics, saying the quiet part loud and the false part repeatedly." Leavitt's meteoric rise within Trump's inner circle, analysts noted, correlated not with innovative strategy, but with something far more valuable in that ecosystem: unwavering loyalty. While experienced communications veterans had jumped ship amid the administration's turbulence, Leavitt had proven herself indispensable through a singular talent: the ability to repeat demonstrably false narratives without flinching. Kimmel's nightly dissections revealed the pattern with devastating clarity. Clips of Leavitt's appearances across networks showed her recycling identical phrases, regardless of the question asked. When confronted with contradictory evidence, her responses followed a predictable algorithm: deny, deflect, demonize the source. The crowd's laughter masked a sobering realization. This wasn't incompetence but strategy. Remember when press secretaries at least pretended to check their facts? Kimmel asked, as side-by-side videos showed Leavitt contradicting official records, scientific consensus, and occasionally, statements made by Trump himself only hours earlier. Now we have a rapid response director, whose primary qualification is the ability to rapidly respond without responding to the actual question. Behind closed doors, former administration officials revealed a different Karoline Leavitt, one who understood the game all too well. "She knows exactly what she's doing," one departed staffer confided. "The goal isn't to communicate truth, but to exhaust the public's capacity to distinguish it from fiction." This wasn't mere partisan critique. Media scholars identified Leavitt's approach as textbook information warfare, flooding the zone with enough contradictory statements that verification becomes too exhausting for the average citizen to pursue. The technique had proven effective in authoritarian systems worldwide, now deployed in the world's oldest democracy. In response to Kimmel's growing influence, Leavitt doubled down. Her social media feeds became exercises in reality distortion, claiming economic victories during market plunges and touting healthcare protections, while the administration actively dismantled them in court. When Kimmel pointed out these contradictions, Leavitt accused him of being part of a coordinated attack on the president. The irony wasn't lost on observers. The more Kimmel simply quoted Leavitt's own statements back to her, the more she claimed to be misrepresented. This cycle created a surreal political theater, where the administration's spokeswoman insisted the public disbelieve what they had witnessed firsthand. "What's truly remarkable," noted one political psychologist monitoring the confrontation, "is how Leavitt has transformed from communications professional to living symbol of the administration's relationship with reality, flexible to the point of breaking." As the standoff intensified, polling revealed an unexpected consequence. The harder Leavitt fought against Kimmel's satire, the more credible his critiques became to moderate voters. Her denials, rather than neutralizing his comedy, were amplifying it, each contradictory statement providing new material for the following night's monologue. Leavitt had become trapped in the most dangerous position for any political operative. She had become the story. No longer just a messenger, she now personified the administration's desperate scramble to maintain control of a narrative unraveling under the weight of its own contradictions. And as the presidential election loomed on the horizon, both Trump and Leavitt would soon discover that in the battle between comedy and chaos, laughter ultimately cuts deeper than fear. The political carnival continued its relentless tour across America's consciousness, with the Trump administration's messaging machine grinding forward despite increasingly visible fractures in its facade. Cal Morgan watched as the spectacle of denial became more elaborate than the substance it attempted to mask. Leavitt's tactical repetition had evolved into something approaching performance art. When confronted with damning evidence of administration failures, her responses became increasingly choreographed, as if reality itself were merely an inconvenient narrative to be rewritten. "We're witnessing unprecedented economic growth and security under President Trump's leadership," she declared to bewildered reporters as markets tumbled and international alliances fractured. The gap between her proclamations and observable reality had grown so vast that even traditionally sympathetic outlets began questioning the strategy. Kimmel, sensing blood in the water, intensified his satirical assault. His nightly segments now featured a dedicated Leavitt translation service, where he methodically decoded her statements with surgical precision. When Leavitt says fake news media, what she actually means is journalists who quoted the president accurately, Kimmel explained to thunderous audience laughter. And when she says the American people know the truth, she's referring exclusively to those who haven't bothered to verify any of the administration's claims. The Trump operation responded with their time-tested formula: more volume, more outrage, more accusations. Leavitt appeared on increasingly fringe platforms, where challenging questions were prohibited by design. These controlled environments became the last refuge for messaging too fragile to withstand scrutiny. "What we're watching," explained a veteran political strategist, "is the communication equivalent of retreating to ever smaller fortresses. They're winning fierce battles in rooms where everyone already agrees with them, while surrendering the larger war for credibility." Perhaps most revealing was the administration's internal metrics of success. Former staffers confirmed that Leavitt's performance evaluations measured only message discipline and loyalty, never accuracy or effectiveness. In team meetings, talk focused exclusively on winning the day, rather than building sustainable public trust. "We were specifically instructed never to acknowledge mistakes," one departed communications aide revealed. Admitting error was considered weakness, even when continuing the lie damaged our credibility further. Meanwhile, Kimmel had discovered that simply playing unedited clips of Leavitt contradicting herself proved more devastating than any punchline he could craft. The audience's laughter had evolved from amusement to a more uncomfortable recognition. They weren't witnessing incompetence, but a deliberate strategy to exhaust their capacity for outrage. "The truly frightening part isn't the lies themselves," Kimmel observed during one particularly incisive monologue. "It's that they're betting on us becoming too tired to care about the difference between truth and fiction." Polling revealed the strategy's diminishing returns. While Leavitt's performances energized the already converted base, each theatrical defense pushed moderate voters further away. The administration had mastered preaching to the choir while hemorrhaging the congregation. Yet the machinery showed no signs of course correction. If anything, as credibility declined, the performances became more extreme, a feedback loop of escalating absurdity. Leavitt's press appearances now featured props, pre-selected friendly reporters, and background music designed to overwhelm critical thinking with emotional cues. The nation found itself trapped in a disorienting cycle, each day bringing new controversies too numerous to fully process before the next wave arrived. This wasn't governance but spectacle, a continuous shell game designed to exhaust rather than inform. "The fundamental miscalculation," noted a respected media ethicist studying the phenomenon, "is believing Americans will indefinitely prioritize entertaining performance over functional leadership. History suggests otherwise." As the political circus rolled on, both protagonists in this strange confrontation had become almost symbolic. Kimmel wielding laughter as a desperate defense of observable reality, Leavitt performing increasingly elaborate dances to distract from it. And somewhere beneath the noise, a weary electorate searched for solid ground in a landscape deliberately designed to destabilize. The political battlefield had shifted to a terrain where the weapons were not bullets but punchlines. Cal Morgan observed as Jim Kimmel, armed with nothing but satire, dismantled the carefully constructed narratives of an administration in crisis. Night after night, Kimmel's comedy had evolved from mere entertainment into something far more potent, a mirror held unflinchingly to power. His monologues no longer sought just laughter. They demanded accountability. "What we're witnessing here isn't just a comedian making jokes," noted a media analyst. "It's the last functioning check on power when traditional mechanisms fail." The effect was devastating. Each satirical segment stripped away another layer of the administration's protective armor, revealing the fragility beneath. Kimmel didn't need to fabricate or exaggerate. Reality itself had become the punchline. Karoline Leavitt found herself fighting an unwinnable war. Her rapid response operation, once a well-oiled machine of deflection and counterattack, now resembled a frantic game of whack-a-mole. For every talking point she deployed, Kimmel unearthed 3 contradictions. "The American people can see through this charade of comedy masquerading as journalism," Leavitt declared on a friendly broadcast, her voice betraying the strain of perpetual defense. Yet polling told a different story. The more Kimmel simply replayed her own contradictions, the more the public trust eroded. Donald Trump, watching from the gilded confines of his private quarters, alternated between rage and disbelief. His tweets became increasingly erratic, often firing off at 2 a.m. against the unfunny late-night loser who dared to mock him. Each presidential outburst only provided Kimmel with fresh material, feeding a cycle that benefited only one side. "When satire provokes this level of reaction from the powerful," observed a cultural historian, it means the jokes are landing too close to truth. Viewers noted a shift in the laughter during Kimmel's shows, from spontaneous amusement to something more cathartic, almost desperate. In a political landscape where objective reality had become contested territory, humor had become the last refuge of shared understanding. Leavitt's team attempted to weaponize outrage, organizing boycotts and social media campaigns against Kimmel's advertisers. The efforts backfired spectacularly when the comedian read the threats on air, turning them into more fodder for his relentless satirical mill. "They're not angry because I'm lying," Kimmel told his audience to thunderous applause. "They're angry because I'm not." Behind closed doors, even some administration loyalists privately acknowledged the damage. "We can spin policy failures and scandals," one confided anonymously. "But we can't spin being laughed at. Once they're laughing at you, not with you, something fundamental breaks." The confrontation had evolved beyond a mere political skirmish into something more profound, a referendum on whether power could still be held accountable through traditional means. When official channels of oversight faltered, it was the jester who stepped into the void, speaking truths that others dared not utter. As this political drama played out on television screens across America, it revealed an essential truth. In a world of spin and carefully crafted narratives, laughter remains the most human response to absurdity. When Kimmel's audience laughed, they weren't just being entertained, they were engaging in a profound act of resistance against the normalization of deception. The lesson emerged not in grand pronouncements but in the simple power of refusing to accept fantasy as reality. Long after the administration's talking points faded into history, the cutting edge of truth delivered through satire would remain. A reminder that even in the most chaotic times, clarity can be found in the most unexpected places. In a world where political drama often masquerades as entertainment, satire becomes the scalpel that cuts through the noise. Kimmel's relentless roast unveils the fragile egos and empty promises behind the Trump administration's facade, while Leavitt's frantic defenses only amplify their vulnerabilities. This saga warns us that power sustained by denial and spectacle is doomed to collapse under scrutiny. The ultimate lesson: truth, no matter how loud the distraction, remains unshaken. And those who wield laughter as a weapon hold the key to accountability in an era of political theater.